Hello and welcome to the transcription explanation of this design. It was done using Doctor's Cot, which is a phonetic script, which is why I have so much stuff on my screen right now. And the first thing I want to do is the phonetic transcription, which I use 2phonetics.com to do. So, and we keep living anyway is the quote I transcribed. So type it in there and it spits it out here, and this is what it sounds like.
And we keep living anyway.
Sounds right. Okay. So this is what we're going to be transcribing. So to do that, we use this key, which is the Doctor's Cot key. And there's a little bit I want to talk a bit about before I jump right into the design, which are how the letters are stacked in the consonant chunks. So a consonant chunk can have just one consonant in it, like this example. And to tell if it has only one in it, you look at the outer and inner circle. If they're the same, it's just one consonant. If they're different, they're two different consonants. So, yeah, this is a thick, thin line, and this is just a thick line. So this is the thick line goes with the thick line, and then the thin lines go with the thin line. So we know that this thick line is the second one, and this open dot on the thick thin is the first one. So open dot thick thin, open dot thick thin is the B, and then thin line passing through is an R sound. Okay. So, and then last but not least, there's the vowels, which are these modifiers to our rings. So we have ones that interrupt the inner circle. We have ones between the inner and outer, ones that interrupt just the inner circle and stop before the outer circle, and then ones that are fully enclosed within the inner circle, and then ones behind the inner circle. So, yeah. This is a thin line circle between the two. So here between the two, thin line circle, that's the E and V. So, yeah. Let's go ahead and hop to the design. Okay, so here's our first thing. It is the start circle. It's a thick, thin, thick, thin. And this is our end circle, thin, thick, thin, thick. And then the words are scattered between the start and stop circle. And each word has its own circle. So this is first word, second word, third word, fourth word, fifth word. And words that have multiple consonant chunks in them are contained within a double line. So here's our double line, thin, thin, around our first word chunk. These can be any thickness. It doesn't really matter unless it's just something that is just one consonant chunk word. So anyway, here's our first word, and you read the big consonant chunk to the small consonant chunk. So this is the big consonant chunk here, and it is a thick, thin, thick, thin. So it's just one consonant chunk with an open and closed dot. So open, closed dot, thick, thin, thick, thin. Okay, so this is our nothing symbol. So this is what you have to use if you start a word with a vowel sound, which this word does. It starts with the AE sound. Well, the A. Okay, so here's our little vowel, and it is located inside our circles. Let's scroll this down a little bit so you can see our vowels. So it's inside the inner, and it's a double line. So that's the AE. So this is the AE. Cool. And then we have this. Looks like thin, thin, and then a thick. So we have two different vowels. So what's on our thin, thin? Well, these lines are thin, thin. So these lines are bent, thin, thin. So bent lines, thin, thin. So that's a N sound. And then we have two open on a thick. D. So nd. Sweet. Okay, so here's ant. Wheat. Sweet. Close that. And then we have this word next. Okay? It's not got it's just one consonant chunk, so these outer circles are important. So it's thin, 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 thin. Okay, so it's just one consonant chunk. Cool. So, thin, thin with open and closed dot. So thin, thin, open and closed dot, that's a W. And then we have single thin line, vowel, between the two. So that's the E. Sweet. We is good. Oh, and these are just pause. They're like breaks in talking. Same thing with these commas. We don't use that in the script anywhere. You just kind of space the words out using, the word circles. Okay, here's our next word circle. So, looks like we have 1, 2, 3 rings. So the outer ring is just the outer ring. Then these two are the biggest consonant chunk. So let's look at what's actually part of this word circle. So this word circle line breaks here and does not continue. So this thing is actually part of this word. So just the stuff within here is part of this word, okay? So we have our outer word circle, and then we have this big chunk. So it looks like thick, thin, thick, thin. So it's just one consonant chunk. okay, with a single line. So thick, thin, single line. So that's a k. Cool. So there's our k. And then we have a single thin between the two. Okay, that's the same as that in the we key, e, that sound. So it's here, single thin between the two. So there's the key, and then we have our last consonant chunk, thin, 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 thin. So it's one vowel, it's one consonant with two open. Sweet. P, keep. So keep, and now here's living, which I admit does look like a Pokeball. I tried to increase the size of the stuff interrupting it, but it's hard to make something with the biggest feature in this row because you have to have this kind of Pokeball looking thing. Anyway, so thin, thick is our outer sentence circle, and it breaks here. So just like this being part of this word, because it's within this sentence, this word circle, this thin, thin line holds this last word. So this stuff here is part of this last word, but thin, thick, everything within here is part of. Let me actually hide everything else. So yeah, this is this sentence, this word circle just here, because this line continues here. Anyway, whatever. I'm just gonna make everything come back now. Okay, so we're looking at living. So we have this big chunk here, thin, 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 thin. So it's one consonant with a line going straight through, double line straight through. So that's the O. Cool. And we have thin, thin between the two. Thin, thin between the two. Okay, that's the big I. So I. We don't have the V yet. So U, I. Okay, now we gotta find our next biggest. This would be the next biggest. This is still smaller than this circle would be. So we have thin, thin, single thin, with a vowel in it, and two open. So single thin, two open. There's our V. And then same thing as this one. Between the two inner and outer, we have a double thin. So between outer and inner, double thin. I. So that's the V. And then we have the ing sound, which is a single thin with the line passing straight through it. So that's the ing. So living. And then last but not least, we have anyway. So here's our anyway circle, this double thin around this whole thing. So we got to figure out which one's bigger between this circle and this circle. Well, this one continues with this thick ring around living. So this is how big this one would be, which is bigger than the middle one. So this is our biggest circle. And let's look at the lines in it. We have a thin, thick, a thick, thin, thick, thin. So it's the same thing with an open and closed, which is, again, our nothing, because it starts with the eh sound. So it's a single thick interrupting the middle chunk. So interrupting the middle chunk, single thick. There we go. There's our eh. Okay, so that's that. And now we find our next biggest. Well, this one is bigger than this one, which is bigger than this one, so it's this one. So thin, 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 so it's the same thing. So it's one consonant, and it looks like it's got a bent line. Thin, thin, bent line. That would be the N sound. And then we have the same thing as this boy, the I, living, ni, living anyway. Anyway, it's this one here. I'm gonna trust the transcription. It sounds like
and we keep living anyway.
Anyway, because I have an American accent, and I'll try to American accent things. Anyway, so we have this, again, the big I. So thin, thin between the two. Thin, 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 thin between the two. Thin, thin. So, that's the ni. This is the N, I. And then we have the way. So this is our next one. It is a thin, 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 thin. So it's one consonant chunk in the thin, thin. And it's got an open and a closed dot. So it's a W. And then we have another interrupted middle chunk. So it's in this column. And it's a thin, thin. So that is our little E. Way. And then we have an I, which, again, we have to have another thick, thin with the two open and closed dots. So we have thick, thin, open, close. So this is that nothing symbol. And then we have that same I again. This shows up a lot. The thin between the two. We thin between the two. Woo! And then we have the end. So yeah.
And we keep living anyway.
I'll slow it way down and be like,
and we keep living anyway.
Yeah. Cool. So that's that.